These are the G6 notes on parallel lines cut by a transversal. We're going to highlight and color code on the diagram. The first vocabulary word is transversal. A transversal is a line that intersects two parallel lines. So down here in our diagram, let's highlight the transversal that goes through the parallel lines. Now we're going to talk about vertical angles. In a different color, I want you to highlight the term vertical angles. Vertical angles are two angles that are opposite from each other and are formed by intersecting lines. So with your highlighter, I want you to highlight one example of a pair of vertical angles in the same color. So here we have an example of two vertical angles. They are right across from each other and they're formed by intersecting lines. I'm going to show you other examples of vertical angles, but I only want you to keep one pair highlighted. Here's another example of vertical angles, right across from each other. They're also congruent, formed by two intersecting lines. Another example is right here. And a final example is right here. Those are all examples of pairs of vertical angles. Please make sure to only highlight one pair, otherwise you'll have every angle highlighted. Now we're going to talk about corresponding angles. Make sure you have a third color of highlighter. Corresponding angles are angles that occupy the same position when a line intersects two other lines. So one example of corresponding angles would be right here and then down below. They're both on the bottom right. Please highlight one pair of corresponding angles on your diagram. I'm going to show you the other examples. Another example of corresponding would be here on the top right. Third example on the top left of the intersection, those are corresponding. And again, remember, corresponding angles are congruent. They're equal measurements. And then a final example down here. I'm going to keep the original example, which was the bottom right corner, corresponding angles. All right, let's go back to our original color of highlighter and go down to the next part of the notes. We're going to talk about adjacent angles. Adjacent means side by side, so they're angles that are right next to each other. They're side by side and share a common side between them. So one example of adjacent angles would be right here. They're right next to each other. Alternate interior angles are angles that are inside the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal. I want you to highlight just one example of alternate interior. So we have to be inside of the parallels, and we have to be on opposite sides of that transversal. So one example would be the two angles seen here. So please highlight one pair of alternate interior. I'm going to show you the other example. The other example of alternate interior would be here, opposite sides of the transversal, inside of the parallel. In a diagram like this, there are only two pairs of alternate interior angles. The last term that we're going to talk about is alternate exterior angles. These are angles that are outside of the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal. So one example of alternate exterior would be outside here, top left and bottom right. Please highlight one pair on your notes. The second example would be here, outside of the parallel on opposite sides of the transversal. Now I'm going to show you on an angle diagram how to find all of the missing angles just given one angle using the vocabulary that we talked about today. If we know that this angle is 60 degrees, then we also know that this angle is vertical to it, which means that that angle is also 60 degrees. Because this 60-degree angle forms a straight line with this angle right here, that means that they are supplementary. If we take 180 and subtract 60 from it, we're left with 120 degrees. So that means that the angle immediately to the right is also going to be 120 degrees. This angle right here is vertical with the angle right across from it, which means the angle right across from it is 120 degrees. 4 of these angles are corresponding with the angles seen below. That means that the angles below will have the exact same measurements. 60 degrees on the top right, 120 degrees on the top right, 120 on the bottom left, and 60 on the bottom right. So the angles will all be corresponding, which means they will match each other. And that's how you find all 8 angles on 2 parallel lines cut by a transversal, just starting with one measurement.